Tens of thousands of armored troops stand in the morning fog, facing an equally massive opposing force. The atmosphere is tense, the resources committed are staggering, and neither side has moved an inch. When modern readers open The Art of War, they expect a manual for exactly this moment. They look for tactical formations, weapon deployments, and the mechanics of commanding troops in physical combat. But Sun Tzu explicitly rejects physical combat as the ideal outcome. In Chapter 3, he outlines his actual thesis. To fight and conquer in all your battles is not supreme excellence. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance entirely, without ever engaging in physical combat. This diagram illustrates Sun Tzu's hierarchy of strategic action. The optimal choice is at the top, balking the enemy's plans. Failing that, you prevent their alliances. Lower still is attacking their army in the field. And at the absolute bottom of this funnel is the worst possible policy, besieging walled cities. Launching men against fortified walls like swarming ants requires months of preparation. 1/3 of the attacking force is typically slain, often while the town remains untaken. Sun Tzu categorizes this approach as a catastrophic strategic failure. The Art of War is not a guide for how to strike blows. It is a systemic framework designed specifically to ensure that fighting is mathematically unnecessary. The reason physical combat is discouraged isn't a matter of pacifism. Chapter 2 establishes the driving tension of the text. Prolonged kinetic conflict is an existential threat to the state's economy. Raising a force of 100,000 mail-clad soldiers and supplying them over vast distances exacts a precise, devastating toll. The daily expenditure at home and at the front reaches 1,000 ounces of silver per day. That massive overhead includes the physical materials required to project military cower: glue, paint, armor, and heavy, meticulously constructed chariots. A protracted campaign guarantees a drain on the public substance. When the treasury is exhausted, local prices go up, and the peasantry is afflicted by heavy economic exactions to replace broken equipment and worn-out horses. This balancing scale shows the severe logistical penalty of extended supply lines. Moving provisions from the home state requires immense energy. One single cartload of captured enemy provisions is equivalent in value to 20 cartloads transported from your own store. This strict 20-to-1 ratio dictates that a successful army must forage on the enemy. Capturing their resources is the only mathematical way to maintain operational viability in hostile territory. Because resource attrition destroys nations, destroying the enemy's infrastructure is counterproductive. The overarching strategic imperative is to capture the enemy state whole and intact, absorbing their wealth rather than obliterating it. Because physical combat is prohibitively expensive and inherently chaotic, the outcome must be strictly calculated and guaranteed prior to deployment. This radar chart plots the 5 constant factors. Sun Tzu relies on these 5 foundational variables to model the conflict in the temple, long before any troops march. Moral law and the commander act as the internal metrics of the state. They measure societal alignment, determining if the people are in complete accord with their ruler, alongside the pure executive competence of the leadership. Heaven and earth represent the external environmental variables. This plots the impact of climate, seasons, distances, and the danger of open ground versus narrow passes. Finally, method and discipline. This governs the systemic control of the military apparatus, the maintenance of supply roads, subdivisions of rank, and strict control of military expenditure. Sun Tzu states that the general who rigorously compares these variables and conducts many calculations in the temple ere the battle is fought will inevitably conquer. The one who makes few calculations will lose. Under this framework, victory on the field is merely a trailing indicator. The battle is effectively won or lost in the boardroom during this exact pre-calculation phase. If the calculations determine that deployment is necessary, the commander operates under a strict operational reality. Never engage in symmetrical, fair combat. The first principle of deployment is to put the army in a defensive position, where defeat is impossible. Then you simply wait for the enemy to make an error that provides an opening. This strategic potential is Shi. Sun Tzu compares this energy to bending a crossbow. The sudden release of that potential is pulling the trigger. Once released, this force is not rigid. It operates like fluid dynamics. Think of a massive river carving through a jagged, unyielding mountain valley. Looking at this topographic heat map, we see how military tactics must behave exactly like water. Water shapes its course according to the nature of the ground over which it flows. The mandate here is to rigorously avoid what is strong, the high-pressure zones represented by these red blocks, and strike exclusively at what is weak. To create those weaknesses, the commander employs deception to keep the intended attack spot unknown. This forces the adversary to prepare for strikes from multiple possible directions simultaneously. If they strengthen their front, they weaken their rear. If they send reinforcements everywhere, they distribute their strength so thinly that they guarantee weakness everywhere. Physical engagement is never a test of bravery. It is the ruthless application of localized, overwhelming kinetic pressure against pre-identified systemic vulnerabilities. But this raises the ultimate operational question. How does a commander accurately map those specific vulnerabilities, or calculate those 5 factors in the first place? The entire strategic apparatus requires one foundational dataset to function: foreknowledge. This foreknowledge cannot be elicited from spirits, derived from deductive calculation, or guessed from historical experience. It requires deliberate, systematic human extraction. This network map illustrates what the text calls the divine manipulation of the threats, the mobilization of 5 distinct classes of spies to penetrate the enemy's reality. Local spies utilize district inhabitants. Inward spies leverage compromised enemy officials. Doomed spies feed false deception data outward, while surviving spies bring verified intelligence back to the camp. The entire intelligence apparatus relies on the converted spy, the turned enemy agent. Treating this asset with the utmost liberality provides the foundational access required for the other 4 classes to function. Controlling the flow of truth is the ultimate weapon. The commander who achieves total information asymmetry controls the reality of the battlefield. This brings us back to the most famous axiom in the text: all warfare is based on deception. Through the lens of systems analysis, this becomes a method for corrupting the adversary's decision-making data. Bringing back our 5-factor calculation, we see 2 simultaneous operations at play. You use espionage to achieve perfect clarity on your own data, while using deception to deliberately scramble the data your enemy is using to calculate their survival. This is the core operational sequence. Mask your true form, pierce the enemy's reality, calculate the outcome with absolute certainty. Only after this psychological checkmate is secured does the true master strategist ever take the field, because the victorious strategist only seeks battle after the victory has been won. The art of war removes the glory from kinetic combat. It teaches commanders to project such overwhelming, pre-calculated superiority that the enemy has no choice but to surrender to the math before a single sword is ever drawn.